Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this Monday night, February 6th in-depth ag forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. To get us started off today, I do want to spend some time talking a bit about, I think, the major news story over the weekend, which was the balloon that traversed the United States and came from China. We're going to talk about that in a second, but I want to tell you something. If you want to get toward the end of this video, I do kind of discuss the new long-range data from the European model and what that might mean, and plus some important stuff about South America. But what I found fascinating about the whole issue with the balloon was really two things. So if we take the stance of there was some sort of surveillance balloon. It was interesting in the timing of its launch because as it was brought across the country, it did hit the United States just as a large area of high pressure was building and moving from basically the Canadian prairie and parts of the Western Plains all the way over toward the southeast, which meant clear skies. So when you look at this is mostly snow. Now, I studied high-resolution satellite. In fact, I helped along with some of the design of EOS Terra and some of the products that it makes. That's a NASA project. That was my graduate research. So I feel a bit familiar with how we do remote sensing. And as I think about what would have been on that particular balloon and its platform, I don't quite know what they would be able to gain by putting that over us that they couldn't have gained from high-resolution satellite. So I'm just going to pretend maybe they were doing it to remotely sense something about agriculture. Maybe they were curious as to how much snow was actually here, or maybe what the drought situation looks like. Because as I look around, there's still quite a bit of snowpack that's sitting here throughout the plains, getting into the northern plains and even parts of the upper Midwest. But you notice that every single picture you saw of the balloon, like this one when it was finally shot down over South Carolina, the skies were always bright blue, and that was because, again, it was time to come across the country when there was a ridge of high pressure. And so you probably heard a lot of folks talking about the NOAA Hysplit model. And you know what? Just because this is my extended video, I'm going to show you how this thing works. It's a really fun tool. So we'll just go to a new browser here. You can just Google NOAA Hysplit model. Oops, I misspelled it. Split model, and when you get there, yeah, it should show up right here at the top. So I'm going to click on this link right here, and this is how you can go access it as well. So what you want to do if you want to see the trajectories, I recommend using the ensemble. So click on the word ensemble right in through here and click next. And then I want you to change the model. I want you to change it to the GFS. That's the 240-hour or the 10-day forecast. Then you can pick anywhere you want. So I have to drive over to Nebraska City tonight. So I'm going to click close to Nebraska City, which is somewhere right into there. And then that picks my lat long. I can now click next. Now, if I'm curious as to where the flow is coming from, I'm going to use today's 12Z model run. You have other options here of different model runs. The 12Z was the latest, so that's the one I'd like to use. Now, I'm going to be there tomorrow, so I'm going to go ahead and pick out the 7th, and I'm going to be there in the middle of the day, so I'm going to pick 18. That would be noon. Okay, so I'm also curious as not where the weather is going from there, but where it came from, so I'm going to click backward. And I'm interested in the low-level temperatures, just because there's certainly some mild air that's coming across the country. So where did the mild air come from? I'm going to leave the height at 500 meters. Now I can come down here to the bottom, click Run the Trajectory Model, and then it just takes a couple moments. And what it's doing is it's actually computing using the GFS ensemble where the air, that is where I will be tomorrow at noon, coming from. And it's kind of just takes maybe 10-15 seconds for it to generate. It'll actually tell you when it's updated here, and you can get a GIF file. So, curiously enough, where I will be tomorrow, there's some mild Pacific air came through British Columbia and then right down through the Canadian prairie and into this part of Nebraska. Now, I know the map's a little bit, kind of laid on its side here, but it's just an interesting thing. So if the Japanese would have launched a balloon, remember, they actually did that back in World War II. It's called the Fugo bombing campaign, right? It would have followed these trajectories and ended up in Nebraska some 10 days later. But that's not what we're talking about right now. What this is actually going to tell me is I need to be paying attention to what the temperatures are like coming through the Canadian prairie, because that's going to be the source region of some of the air that's coming here over Nebraska where I'll be tomorrow. And we'll talk about that in just a few seconds. So you probably saw a lot of these figures. And what this one was I ran the model on Friday night when the balloon was over Missouri. And it was interesting to see, you can trace back with time that the balloon was coming from China, which is here, if it followed this trajectory. What I actually found neat was it traced out the ridge. That's the ridge across the west. It is this ridge that has been really quite permanent, sending systems into British Columbia. This is why California has gone drier over the last several weeks, since the major precipitation event that ended about the 17th of January. And this overall told me that there'd be net convergence. Flow like this in the atmosphere is convergent flow at the jet stream level that produces high pressure, and it cleared the skies out, and that's what you saw. Now, a minute ago I said, well, what would they have been looking at if we assumed it was meteorological? I wonder if they were curious just how much snow's there. Because we know that the United States, central plains of the United States and parts of the Midwest Corn Belt, there's an area in through here that is still going to be talking about drought going into the 2023 growing season. So current snowpack, remember the balloon kind of went right in through here and ended up in Missouri. It kind of traced out the Missouri Valley. So maybe they were curious about the Missouri River. I don't know. But you can see that through Montana, due to the flow we've seen for the last several weeks, there's not much snowpack in Montana right now. Nor for the western plains here in parts of, the Dakotas, or even pockets of Nebraska. There's still some snow, though, on the ground in Nebraska, and that's important to think about the overall water health of this region. But just to look at it another way, the newest drought monitor released last week continues to show that, we're talking about drought issues, long-standing drought issues that still line the plains of the United States, and that balloon went right over the top of this, into this area. I guarantee you the balloon could not see this, because to design an instrument that can penetrate and see down that far, 40 inches below the surface of the Earth, is not something that can be powered by what you saw there. This would require ground-penetrating radar plus a radiometer that has the right frequencies to hit this, and that's kind of the business of NASA. And I'm going to keep coming back to this many more times through spring, but this is just the latest data that continues to show that there is drought still sitting underneath the snowpack and even under the recent precipitation that's come here across the eastern Corn Belt. And this is all from last fall's very, very dry conditions from September almost all the way to the beginning of November. That was not undone in winter, despite good liquid in the snow sitting on top of this. Now, where it's been extremely wet has been much farther to the south, and we're going to talk about more wet weather coming into the mid-south, but also the flooding situation down here in just a few moments. Now, I think it would have been more interesting had by accident that balloon been taken north, like over the Chukchi Sea, and gotten pulled into the flow that we saw on Friday that originated near the North Pole. I showed this last week, but the flow that came down here kind of did this loop through the Hudson Bay and ended up in New York on Friday was a part of an Arctic air mass which sent high temperatures down there below 0 degrees Fahrenheit. And I hope you all got to see this at some point on the news. This is just a link put out there by Peter here, Forster, that showed from the observatory at Mount Washington. And when I showed this to my kids when it came out, they're like, well, where is that? I'm like, well, that's at the top of a mountain in New Hampshire. And I believe altitude is almost 7,000 feet. But the depth of the cold air that was in this area meant that we actually had a tropopause fold that came down, meaning that the top of Mount Washington temporarily stuck up into the stratosphere. Those are 120 mile an hour winds at times, wind chills well below 100 degrees Fahrenheit, well below minus 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And the first thing my son asks is like, do people live here? I'm like, yeah, people actually work there. And maybe someday I'll take him up and show him what it looks like. But just incredible to see those conditions in that particular area. Now, over the last 7 days, much of the West was drier, save an event that came through. There was one front that hit the Northwest, and then one that kind of, an upper level low that slid down right in through here. But what we're trying to capture in this image is the flooding rains across parts of the South, some of the drought relieving rains that hit parts of coastal North and South Carolina. And then, of course, much of this on the backside and through here was that ice event. And I've made the statement a few times. I believe once they're done assessing it, they will find that this particular ice storm will likely be our second billion-dollar weather disaster of this year. Now, I talked to a guy in Texas yesterday, and it was an interesting comment that he made because he said, Eric, it's devastating. The trees are down. I mean, it's a mess. He goes, but we received some moisture. And he says that moisture, even though it came in the form of an ice storm, it is moisture that got into the soil. And I get it, because of the extensiveness of the drought that it was endured last year, any form of it's good. So good overall, let me put it that way. It's not to take away anything from the devastation of that ice storm, but I just need to keep an eye on the longer range and what that means going forward. And so while he's cleaning up tree debris for the next several months, at least some of that moisture made it in. So what you've got here kind of gives us the last holdout of the really dry conditions in the northwest into the Canadian prairie, and then of course right here along parts of Montana into North Dakota. This is all from earlier in the year. This was the swath of flow from the jet stream that just targeted this area. The heavy rains that have been down here in the south, lower Mississippi River Valley and southeast, but moisture was realized, and so therefore we kind of came out of the basement here in terms of our rankings and back up maybe toward more normal just because of that one system. Now, Florida has been tucked away too close to the southeastern ridge, and I'm going to continue to talk about that southeastern ridge today. I think it's going to be very influential on the pattern for at least the next 2 to 3 weeks. But thinking about the west and snowpack, I just wanted to bring you up to speed on the latest data from NRCS, and my concerns are now starting to turn to two things. One is that the Pacific Northwest needs quite a bit more snow. And even though some of the longer range forecasts are favorable for a wetter rest of February and early March, it's not as though it's the right setup to deliver big time snow. So even though some of these numbers are in that 80 to 90%, I'd rather have them at 100 to 120%. But we still see that down here from California through Nevada, getting into Utah, the upper Colorado Basin, the lower Colorado Basin, there's still quite a bit of snow in the mountains compared to average. So we like the picture south. We need to revive the snowpack farther to the north. Now today, looking at some satellite imagery, there's kind of an interesting thing. We watched on Sunday a system start to form just here off the Gulf Coast, and I mean, it's a monster right out there. This is just as the sun was setting this afternoon and this evening. And this has been the story all winter for the East Coast. We have yet to see the big high over low pattern, that big ridge north, trough south that can pull one of these systems farther to the East Coast. Instead, we've had in the upper levels this subtropical ridge that's just kind of shoved things out. And as a result, this big system, which could have been a massive nor'easter for the East Coast, it's a couple hundred miles offshore, and that's going to continue to be the case as we go forward. Okay, so talking about the snow issues, I wanted to pull up the latest Snowfall Departure Map. And again, you can kind of see the color bar at the bottom, but I've overlaid numbers, and I'm still working on making this map look better. Probably need to make regional versions of it. But if you look here into parts of New England, there's just a lot of places. I mean, parts of Pennsylvania, 20 to 30 inches in deficit. And you come back through the Midwest, there's places in through here that have yet to see snow. I have not even gotten on a broom to move the snow here in Mahomet, Illinois, where I live. But we still have good snowpack across a broad section of the western Corn Belt, and then you can see the amounts that are still well above normal throughout much of the Intermountain West and the Sierra Nevada mountains. So this is just a good metric to kind of see where we are compared to average. Now in the near term, let's go ahead and just take a quick look at what we've got here coming. I'm going to start this off 6 p.m. on Monday evening. There's this elongated pressure trough that starts from a low up in the Hudson Bay that we're watching as it goes through Minnesota. A little bit of mixed precip here around the Twin Cities and into Wisconsin, but rain to the south of it. And what's going to happen is that pressure trough, which is by tonight going to set up a front right in through here, okay, is going to be the focal point for the next system that's going to form. So we're watching two things. One system coming into the northwest as one moves through Ontario and Quebec. We then are watching on the southern edge of this front the next system to begin right over the Red River Valley of the South, right here. So as that system moves out, this is now getting through, let's tell you where we are. This is Tuesday night, going through the morning on Wednesday, and this animation will end about midday to late in the afternoon on Wednesday. Now there's some concern with this. Of course, this is going to spread some heavy rain throughout the Mississippi and Ohio Valley. We're going to watch for some snow in parts of Kansas, Missouri, Iowa, Wisconsin. I'll show you that on the next model run in a few moments. The low that came through the Pacific Northwest is going to deliver some snow to Montana and Wyoming. But on the southern side of the first one here, we're going to watch out on Wednesday night for the risk of strong to severe storms out of this. And we could get some isolated storms on Tuesday night in eastern Texas. Okay. But bigger picture as we go on is really going to boil down to this map, all right? Since the strong onshore event that delivered all of that moisture to California, so starting on the 17th, going to the 3rd of February, this ridge and this ridge have been almost semi-permanent factors here. So the flow's gone over. It's kind of been forced to dive into parts of the southern plains, Arizona, New Mexico, and then quickly run up over the southeastern ridge. And the big question I have is, how long are we going to see the atmosphere try to go into a repeat mode of this? Because if it is, we're going to keep seeing systems start here and curl toward the Great Lakes. That's what they're going to do. Start here, curl toward the Great Lakes. This is not the setup to deliver moisture to California, significant moisture. It's not even the setup to put snow into Montana. And it's certainly not the setup to bring the snows into the Pacific Northwest. In fact, it's not a setup for snow for really anybody in terms of big snow swaths and blizzards and things of that nature. And the southeastern ridge is very protective, keeping much of the eastern United States quite mild. So that's where we've been. We want to know if we're going to continue to see that. So let's go right to the upper level height pattern. We're going to focus on North America here, but let me walk you through what we're going to see. Now, there is a trough. Here it is on Wednesday. This is the one that I'm concerned about on Wednesday night, giving us good conditions here for the risk of severe storms, and out ahead of it, heavy rain with snow on the backside. But this is the little kicker wave. Remember I said there was another one coming through the northwest? This is the little kicker wave on the backside that's going to take this trough. This is so neat. Because remember, the flow's coming around like this and around like that. This one's going to kick this trough quickly toward New England, watch. So this is now Wednesday evening, getting through Thursday. See how it tosses it up there? And the deeper trough becomes established and moves through late in the week. And I'll show you the results of this. But what do we see happening while this is going on? Another ridge rebuilding. There's a ridge in between. And this all down here is subtropical high. So we've gone back to that same pattern. We then play through the weekend as that trough sweeps east, briefly dropping in some cooler weather. But see the ridge that follows? Now what do we have again? Ridge, trough, and as I play forward from Sunday into next week, that trough gets a reinforcing shot at cold air, but it's coming down like this. And what's it going to have to do? Eject over this ridge. So in the next 10 days, we're going to see two of these kind of systems look like check marks. They're going to come in just like this and roll up. And that's what the models are going to continue to show us. The other part of this pattern is, never did we see in the forecast big ridges go into Alaska or into Greenland. And that's what it takes, the highly amplified flow. Not a ridge here and a ridge here, but a ridge here and there to displace this cold air and send it down to the U.S. So without that, much of the Canadian prairie getting through the United States is going to be quite mild. So when I told you earlier that I'm watching the Canadian prairie to tell me where that source air is going to come from for Nebraska City, I mean, it's coming here. It's coming off of mild Canadian air. Normally in the middle of winter, if I showed that, I'd be like, oh man, I got to pack for brutally cold conditions, but we're just not seeing that right now in the pattern. So let's go forward and do our multi-model analysis. And we've already seen this system form right here coming out of Red River of the South and moving over Illinois, for example. So let's park it out here Thursday morning. This would be after the risk of severe storms rolls through the lower Mississippi River Valley. And what we're going to watch for is where on the back side of this that snow comes. So we could get a little in eastern Kansas, corner of Missouri here, northwest corner, but into Iowa and Wisconsin. That's what the GFS is really putting down the heavy snows here. Europeans got a smaller sliver, but out ahead of it, a lot of rain. And longer term, I love seeing the rain just because of what we showed earlier with the deficit in soil moisture. But that system is going to quickly go toward the Great Lakes. And remember I told you there was a kicker wave coming in the backside? There it is in both models. So we see on Thursday night, working our way into Friday 6 a.m., into Friday midday, the GFS very aggressive on a snow event here. Now, it's not fully resolved in the European. And if you've noticed over the last several weeks, the GFS model has been kind of caving to the European solution all along. So I'm not yet ready to say that this is a real possibility for Friday. But there is the chance for some accumulating snow here on the backside of this. Now, when's that second system come in? Well, we're going to watch over the weekend a little cutoff low. It's really well resolved in the European model. Go down here through parts of California. Not so well seen in the GFS. But as that first system clears New England, what you're going to see is another one coming in and forming right here. Same spot. This is next Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. See how it's doing the same thing? These are these two kind of checkmark systems I was telling you about that come out of the Four Corners, rip through the Ohio River, the Red River Valley of the South, and then move toward the Ohio River Valley, the Mississippi Valley. But you notice their trajectory. Do you see how they're doing that? That's because of what's going on here in the upper levels due to high pressure. The lower levels have high pressure here, and it just sends these systems off in that direction. So I'm going to choose the European model to give you a sense of total precip. So as we play this forward there's the heavy rains that are building into parts of the Mid-South as the first system goes through. We're dry in California. We're dry throughout much of the Midwest, even dry over parts of Mid-Atlantic and the Carolinas and Florida. But very wet conditions possible with system number 1 here coming into these states. We then go into the weekend. Remember, that's when the cutoff low tries to come into California, and one system exits east. Then we know the next system shows up right here on Tuesday and adds to that same trajectory. See that? So there's risk over the next several days of there being a corridor right in through here of very, very heavy rainfall. Now, on the snowfall side of it, I told you this pattern's not set up for a lot of snow. So I would like to just show you the end result of the European model's forecast. I don't care. I'll go out 10 days on this. You notice that it's going to be Ontario and Quebec that are the snowiest. In the mountains, it'll be in British Columbia and parts of the Cascades, but not a whole lot of snow being added to the Sierra Nevadas, nor the Northern Rockies or the Central Rockies as well. And we're just going to keep an eye on system number 1 putting down some snow here. And remember, the GFS wanted quite a bit into this area, but big question marks on that. So 2 systems combined, best snows in the U.S. outside of the mountains are probably going to be in Minnesota. To look at this one other way, I want to show you the probability over the next 10 days of getting an inch of liquid equivalent. And I also want to show you the best chances are 2 inches. Right in through this area is where the ensembles are picking up on the heaviest rain from these next 2 systems. On the snow side of it, this is the chance of getting at least 3 inches of snow over the next 10 days. So you can see how the model's kind of honing in on this particular track behind that first system. But in terms of 6 inches, pretty limited. And in the mountains in the west, over a foot and over 18 inches. So it's along British Columbia and the Cascades where we have our best chances of adding a lot of snow. If this was an El Nino winter, we would see this ripping all the way down here through the Sierra Nevada and throughout the Intermountain West. But we don't yet have the full loss of La Nina, but that's what we're going to talk about in a few moments. Now, what about week 2? The 12Z GFS ensemble is picking up on that second system, and that's why it's got things quite wet into this area, and so does the European. So much of the wet conditions you see here are primarily coming from that second system we described early next week, and possibly followed by a third one at the end of next week. So this is staying very active in this area. Please keep that in mind as I dip into the long-range forecast in a moment. So here's today's high temperatures. We've already experienced these, so this is getting into tomorrow on Tuesday. Can you see now that mild air just kind of flows down like this? So where I'll be here in Nebraska, that's where the mild air is coming from. And it's pushing east as well. And then we even see here's Wednesday's highs getting into Thursday. Now remember, on Thursdays when we're watching this system advect north, so there is colder air over the mountains here, and that does kind of occupy the backside of this, but it's fleeting. By Saturday, it moves into the southeast, and by Sunday, it's out. And like we've been showing for the last few weeks, the ensembles just continue for the next 12 to 15 days to keep this mild pattern in place while we lack the high latitude blocking. What I'll be watching is after about February 18th to the 20th, watch the end of this animation. See how there's a shift from about the 18th on? There is a setup in the Pacific Ocean with the loss of La Nina and the new dominance of the MJO. That's going to change our pattern up at the end of this month if this verifies. So we better talk about that before we get to the new long-range data. This is something I've been waiting to show you guys all weekend. Pretty excited about this because it kind of confirms what I was thinking was going to happen at this point in the year. So it's one of those Hofmüller diagrams, and we're looking here at the reds being westerly winds and the blues and greens being strong easterly winds. Now to start off for the next few days, this is the big kick of La Nina. And then once we get it past 13th to the 15th, 17th, do you see how this is gone? And these westerly winds are expected to move, which is going to push the MJO where it is now, here, all the way over probably into the West Pacific. Now we've seen that in the MJO forecasts, where it's coming out of the Indian Ocean, and very quickly, again coming out here, very quickly going through phases 4 and 5 in like 2 days, and then setting up residence in phases 7 and 8. Now this is where I think the change is going to come, all right? So if we look now at that longer term forecast and suggest that because of a lack of high latitude blocking, that the tropics are dominating the signal, I think we're going to see a move away from this pattern, which we'll see. A big blocking ridge here. There's the southeast ridge, and the systems, as we know, come over and around like this. We're going to get away from this probably around the 18th through the 20th, and maybe move to this. And I haven't seen this in a long time. Well, last time I saw it was early January. Extended Pacific jet around the base of that trough. No longer a ridge over the southeast. If, now this is a big if, but if this sets up, this delivers a big push of moisture into California and the Pacific Northwest. This also sets up, see the ridge building here, the potential for East Coast winter storms, which we have not seen all year long. So that right there will be the top target in my forecasting to see if this verifies. Phase 8 MJO by the time we get toward the end of this month and start March. If this lasts into March, this is a miracle March setup. That's it. That's what we need to see. Okay, other big news from the CPC, they're starting to hint at the breakdown of the southeast ridge end of February, beginning of March. And they're now showing above normal precip for much of the west, but still keeping the Ohio Valley into the Great Lakes states wet as well. So that's going to be a transition we're going to have to watch for. From here, this is the brand new data released by the European model. And I don't agree with it overall with February 17th to March 17th. I think that they've got this biased way too dry. And what I think will end up happening is the jet stream will break down that ridge and at times deliver better moisture into California and keep a very active track over this area. Now, if you notice, there seems to be a bit of a dividing line, and it seems to be along the Mississippi River, where to the east of it, we seem to be seeing wetter conditions, and to the west of it, we don't see the wetter forecast. In fact, the models want to go back over into the southern plains as dry. That's why we get that critical moisture factored in here earlier in this particular video. So there are things about the ECMWF forecast that I'm scratching my head about, primarily California. That's the area that I think might be amiss in this. But on the temperature side of it, we see that they're anchoring quite a bit of colder air there, and also suggesting that if we could move the Pacific jet around, that we could get a few more shots at colder air despite the very mild air that's coming in over the next 10 to 15 days. All right. Now from here, I got to show you this. This is the latest ocean temperature map, sea surface temperature anomaly map. And the strong trade winds that have been driving the cold water here, well, I just showed you, they are beginning to back off as the MJO goes to phase 8. And that change is going to allow some of the warm water that's beneath this to begin to surface and move back across the open Pacific slowly, probably over the next 30, 60, 90 days. We've already seen a lot of warm water emerging here off the west coast of South America. And once again, this has now been consistent ever since October. In fact, let me play this for you. I'll go back and start this on October 2022, and you're going to see the forecast for the Niño 3.4 region ocean temperatures. For reference, that's right in here. Okay. Now, the models were too aggressive on ending the La Niña early. We talked about that. We thought that it would probably end in January, even though the models were pretty aggressive on it early. But as I click play, what you'll see is that each model forecast since then has really just come in line with ending this in spring, now into spring, and then possibly even building in maybe some form of a weak El Nino by early summer. I think the models are too aggressive on this, but I don't know yet. I've got to wait to see how quickly the warm water sloshes back and the trade winds really back off and take on a westerly component, which they haven't done for 3 years. So that's why we're watching that carefully. But the net effect of it is it's going to look something like this. This is the February ocean temperature map. And as I go from here into March, April, May, June, July, and August, we now see that the forecast is from the European is really trying to bring El Nino back pretty quickly. Ending 3 years of La Niña very abruptly this late winter and spring. Now, as I've been talking about, there is a competing factor here. If this water all went over cold, it's not forecasted yet, but if the PDO went positive and this went cold, we would be talking about very wet conditions across most of North America going into spring of 2023. But as it stands, the wet signal's here and the drier signal's there. So I'd like to come into the United States and show you what the seasonal precipitation anomalies do look like. So let's go in here. Let's come back to this point, March, April, May. Now you notice that during that time period, the model wants to be persistent. Wetter conditions here and wetter conditions there. How many times have we seen the models try to predict this over the winter? This could mean we could get some good late season snowpack in Northern California into the Pacific Northwest, but drier conditions along the plains. Tight windows are likely if this verifies throughout the Ohio Valley, the Great Lakes states, the mid-Mississippi River Valley, and down into the Mid-South. There is one thing, though, that a lot of us are honing in on. Even though you see drier conditions here, there seems to be right now, given the transition away from La Niña, a greater risk of seeing severe thunderstorms. I think we have actually a much above average risk of seeing an active early severe thunderstorm season. You say, well, why? Because we have that subtropical ridge. It's feeding in the moisture. If we see jet stream that likes to do this, we've got probably decent shear setting up. And the net effect of that is to really just kick off our severe weather season very, very quickly. Now, I'm just going to show you this, and I want to just put it out there as this is just model information. But as we go from March, April, May to April, May, and June, we see the models keeping so much of parts of the Mid-South, the Tennessee and Ohio Valley, into New England wetter than average. We then step it out again, May, June, July. Same corridors in through here staying wet, and they've even got the West Coast wet, which is odd because that's the end of the wet season there. June, July, August. Look at the model here. And that's kind of the end of this run. I do not think this is going to verify. If you asked me today, I'd say watch the Mississippi as the main dividing line on the eastern side, likely having very tight windows and possibly the risk outside of those severe storms of seeing some regional drought redevelop in the west. So that's what I've got today based off of this new model information. We're just going to have to watch it very, very carefully going forward. The best signal, though, overall, is that the La Niña is forecast to do this. So that's a positive signal for everybody in the country through spring overall. So we'll kind of leave it at that and just keep analyzing it as the new model data from other models comes in. Okay, I'd like to finish with a bit about South America now that we've taken that quick, longer range look. Went out and pulled off some NDVI data for Mato Grosso, Tocantins, Goiás, and Minas Gerais, these areas. And throughout much of December and January, it's been near the top in terms of NDVI values. Now, we have to be careful looking at NDVI imagery over this area because there's often a lot of cloud contamination, but very high NDVI values here. From there, I want to take you down to Cordoba, Santa Fe, and Buenos Aires. And those recent rains have really brought the NDVI values up. There's also been a lot of later planted stuff that's emerged, making it look greener as well. So that's what those January rains and some recent scattered storms have done. Now, our next animation here, if I can get this to restart, there we go, shows one area I want you to watch. Can you watch right in through here? Central Brazil. This is where the monsoonal rains have really been focused over the last several weeks. And I'm concerned that in central Brazil that there's actually been too much rainfall overall. Because as we go into the next several days, we still have a lot of heat in Argentina. There will be an area in through here that through this week, almost to the weekend, we'll see repeated chances of at least 40 degrees Celsius temperatures. So that's over 104 degrees Fahrenheit. It may not be until the weekend that the moisture starts to come into there. So watch. As I play this forward, this is going through this week, getting out here toward Friday into Saturday and Sunday of this week. Now watch, at the end of this animation, do you see how the models are attempting to put rain down from Buenos Aires to Cordoba, Santa Fe along the Paraná River? And they're trying to fill that area in with some moisture. But the area I'm concerned about is right in through here because it's staying extremely wet, some places up to 200 plus millimeters of rainfall as we go forward. So that's 8 inches. That's 8 inches of rain inside of 10 days. And it's been very, very wet there. So at some point, that's going to have a negative effect on the crop. I'm going to talk to some of my colleagues down here in Goiás and see what they say and be sure to report that back to you. But that's it. That's what we're watching. And I appreciate the extra time you've given me tonight. Just kind of a more in-depth analysis, but had a lot to talk about. So we'll talk to you again for those of you that get the report in the morning. And for those of you that watch the Monday and Thursday videos, we'll talk again on Thursday. Thanks.